In this episode, I'm going to show you some animation. My first animation actually. I used Mr. Frank Woods here and the rig that I built the other day, and I did a whole 8 seconds of animation, which equates to 100 frames. After that, I'm going to show you all the little things that didn't go so well and that we can improve on. This is Mythical Forge. I'm Phil, welcome to my workshop. So I shot this little animation using DragonFrame, which is software that is designed for stop motion animation. You basically connect up your camera to your computer running DragonFrame. As long as it's a supported camera, as long as DragonFrame supports that camera, you're good to go. And DragonFrame can actually control some of the camera aspects like ISO, shutter speed and aperture, assuming you're using electronic lenses. You can even do focusing if the camera's got autofocus. I'm in no way an expert in DragonFrame, so I'm not going to do any tutorials on it just yet. I'll probably do some of those a bit further down the track once I've become a bit more proficient at the software. So I shot the video or the animation at 12.5 frames a second, just so that I didn't have to animate so many frames, i.e. 25 frames a second or 30 frames a second, for my very first animation, because I didn't really know what I was doing. Without DragonFrame, it would be a real pain in the butt, because one of the key features that DragonFrame has is a thing called onion skinning, which lets you see sort of a half opacity image of the frame just prior to the one you're shooting, so that you can see how much you've moved the character, whether you've shifted the rig accidentally or bumped something. So it's super handy. Even for this one animation that I did, I found it really useful. So I can only imagine as I get a bit more proficient how useful I'll find the software. As you'll see shortly, I made a few mistakes. I'll take you through a couple of those mistakes. They're relatively easy to mitigate, but this was my first animation. I didn't even know I made them until after I started editing the images in Photoshop and realized what a pain in the butt it was to do some of the erasing of the rig. So lessons learnt there, it was quite valuable. So let's take a look at the animation. Then I'll show you the animation without any edits done to it, i.e. you'll see the rig in place. And then I'll take you through some of the shortcomings that I noticed. In the animation, I went and added a bit of audio onto it. I went onto Epidemic Sound and found some footsteps. And that just gives it a bit more presence and a bit more realism, and I had a bit of fun doing it too. Going to show you in Photoshop a little bit of how I masked out the rig. I did try to do it in Adobe Premiere, but my masking skills in Premiere are still very basic at the moment, and I just had a hell of a time. It kept adjusting masks that I'd already done previously. I'm sure it's user error, but I just found it was very hard, basically, particularly for this kind of thing. Photoshop's much better. You do have to do it frame by frame, but that's kind of the nature of the beast. So this is just an example frame. All I did was create a couple of soft brushes of different sizes just to make it go a bit faster. I could just click between the brushes. And what you need, which I forgot to do initially, was take a frame that is just the background with no character and no rig. So because you want to mask into that, because I forgot to do that, I had to make a background, which was just a composite of 2 shots. Not ideal, and tip for young players. So there's my background, and it's not, you can see there's a few shadows on here from one of the frames that I had to use, but this is a test, so no big deal. So we just select the whole frame, copy it, paste it into the image we want to work with, unlock the background, swap the layer order so that the background layer is at the bottom, and then we can just paint out the bits we don't want. So if I make my brush a bit bigger, I can just paint out the bits of the rig that I don't want, and then we just zoom in and pick a smaller brush and keep painting. And I did this with a mouse, or with a trackpad actually, because I didn't have a tablet. I do now have a tablet, so the next time I do this will be with a tablet and a pen, which is way easier. But you basically just have to go frame by frame and mask everything out, or erase everything, I should say. We're not really creating a mask here, we're erasing. And you can see here that the shadows aren't perfect. There's absolutely nothing I can do with that because of the problems stated earlier. So we just have to put up with that for the first animation. And if you look carefully, some of my painting is not perfect. Again, this is just a test for me to learn. So that's that. So now I save this. Don't save it. Keep your original frame, so don't save it over the top of the original one. You first need to flatten the layers. Save this, and I just had 2 folders, one of the original frames and one of the new masked out frames, and I just saved it in there. Same file name, and just did one by one, and as you can see, all the masked out ones are in here. So it took me a couple of hours, but that's kind of nature of the beast. So that's a very simple way to do to erase a rig. I'm sure I'll come up with better techniques as time progresses, but that's my simple way at the moment. So I'm using Premiere Pro for all my video editing, both the YouTube videos and the animation videos. And to bring up the sequence of frames in Premiere, it's really easy. I've just opened a brand new project in Premiere here. It's got nothing else in it. I'm going to right click on the project and import. Navigate to my frames. Pick the first frame, only the first one, click Options, make sure Image Sequence is selected, and Premiere will know if you've maintained the frame numbers on the file names. Premiere will know to slurp up all the frames in order, so long as you check Image Sequence. So we go Import. There's our sequence. I'm just going to drag it onto the timeline, and my timeline is at 25 frames a second. I shot this sequence at 12.5 frames a second. So I need to tell Premiere that it's a 12.5 second clip, or sorry, the frame rate is 12.5 seconds. And given the timeline is 25 frames per second, it needs to be 50% slower. So then if we play that in Premiere, we have our sequence. And that's pretty much all there is to it, to put it in Premiere. Very easy. And then you can add sound as I did, footsteps, music, whatever. So that's a simple, quick example of getting your frames into Premiere. So the animation itself is actually not too bad in my opinion for a first attempt. Where we have made some mistakes is in the placement of the rig predominantly. As we come in, you can see that there's a number of spots on the left of the character where we're going to have to sort of mask or trace around the character to eliminate the rig. We really want to set up the rig so that we've got a minimal amount of masking to do around the character. And given we've got to do every single frame, it gets really tedious. So here, for instance, it's not that great. As he comes a bit more side on, it's not too bad. Like there, it's pretty much perfect. We can easily get rid of one little bit of the brass rod and just chop out the whole rest of the rig. But as we progress, it's pretty good there, it's pretty good there. It's terrible here. From here onwards, from about here onwards, it's terrible. There's lots of masking out to do. So there, it's really bad. We've got little gaps between his legs, all around the outside of his legs, all around the shoulder and around the side of the head. It's just not great. So that's a really key lesson to learn here. The rig is a bit simplistic for some of this. What I think I really need is a rig that's got a right angle capability, so that we could put the rig off to the side and bend the main arm of the rig so that the character is still facing us, but the rig is actually off to the left or the right. One of the other problems we've got is, of course, shadows everywhere. The bigger the rig, the more the shadows you're going to get. Now, you're not going to be able to eliminate all the shadows, but where the shadows of the character get confused with the shadows of the rig, that's not great either, because that creates a real, not only a masking problem, but it starts to look a bit unrealistic, as realistic as this is ever going to be, when we're trying to cut out the shadows. Cutting out the shadows in the background up there, that's fine. But down here, there's a bit of confusion between the shadows of the character and the shadows of the rig. So that's just not that great. And here's not too bad. The shadows of the character are around there, and the shadows of the rig are sort of out there. So it's not too bad. If we go back, see here it's not great. We want to get this long extended shadow from his leg, but it's getting interrupted by the base. So really, I should have extended the brass arm and pushed the base further back so that we can see the complete foot shadow or leg shadow. And it doesn't, like if I cut that off there when I mask it out, it just looks a bit weird. So that's another problem there. And that's pretty much happening all the way through there. So really I should have had the rig a lot further back from the character. Now that might cause the rig to overbalance a little bit, but then we just need to put a bit more weight on the back of the rig, or blue tack the rig down or something like that. So that's really the core problem, two problems that I had in fixing this in post, is masking out the complexity of the rig behind his body, and I kind of just ignored the shadows. It's the first animation, so I didn't really worry about it. So that's it for this episode. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you liked my little animation. Stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks for watching.